My ML supports my hubby's ex. My hubby finally had enough and blew up. It all started with a chance meeting. I was 24, fresh out of college, working my first job at a marketing firm. Mark and I had known each other since high school, but our paths diverged after graduation. He went off to a prestigious university in another state, while I stayed closer to home, attending a local college. We lost touch, as happens so often with high school friends, but fate had a way of bringing us back together. One crisp autumn evening, I decided to grab dinner at a new restaurant that had opened downtown. As I scanned the menu, I heard a familiar voice call my name. Turning around, I saw Mark, looking more handsome and confident than I remembered. We hugged, exchanged numbers, and promised to catch up soon. Our first date was magical. We talked for hours, reminiscing about old times and sharing our experiences since high school. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and it didn't take long for us to fall in love. We dated for 4 years, during which we grew closer and more in tune with each other's dreams and aspirations. When Mark proposed to me on a snowy winter night, I knew there was no one else I wanted to spend my life with. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with love and laughter. But as we settled into married life, I began to notice a shadow that seemed to loom over our happiness: Mark's ex-girlfriend, Emily, and his mother, Helen. Helen was a formidable woman, the kind who commanded respect and got her way. She adored Emily, who had been a part of Mark's life since middle school. Emily was everything Helen wanted in a daughter-in-law: beautiful, charming, and well-mannered. When Mark and Emily broke up, Helen was devastated. She continued to invite Emily to family events, even after Mark and I started dating. The first time I met Helen was at a family dinner. Mark had warned me about her fondness for Emily, but I didn't expect the cold reception I received. Helen was polite, but there was an underlying tension in her demeanor. As we sat down to dinner, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was Emily. She waltzed in like she owned the place, greeting everyone with hugs and kisses. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a split second before she composed herself. "Oh, you must be Sarah," she said sweetly. "I've heard so much about you." The evening was a blur of forced smiles and uncomfortable conversations. Emily kept making sly remarks about her past with Mark, while Helen watched me with a hawk-like gaze. Mark tried to defuse the tension, but it was clear that his mother and ex-girlfriend were determined to make me feel out of place. Over the next few months, Emily's presence at family events became a constant source of stress for me. She had a knack for making me feel inferior, and Helen did nothing to stop her. In fact, she seemed to encourage it. Every time I voiced my concerns to Mark, he assured me that he would talk to his mother, but nothing ever changed. One particularly memorable incident occurred at a family barbecue. I had spent hours preparing a dish that I knew was one of Mark's favorites. As I placed it on the table, Emily walked over, took one look at it, and said, "Oh, I remember when I used to make this for Mark. He always loved it when I added a special ingredient. Do you use that too, Sarah?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Mark quickly intervened, telling Emily that I had made the dish perfectly, but the damage was done. I spent the rest of the evening feeling like an outsider in my own family. The breaking point came at Helen's 55th birthday party. Mark and I had been married for 2 years by then, and I was tired of the constant comparisons and undermining. Helen had invited Emily, as usual, and I braced myself for another night of snide remarks. As the evening progressed, Helen proposed a toast. She raised her glass and began to speak about how grateful she was for her family and friends. Then she turned to Emily and said, "And a special thanks to Emily, who has always been like a daughter to me." I could feel the tension in the room. Mark's grip on my hand tightened, and I knew he was struggling to keep his composure. Emily stood up, smiling graciously, and said, "Thank you, Helen. I feel the same way about you." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and addressed Helen directly. "Helen, with all due respect, I think it's time you accepted that Mark and I are married now. Emily is part of the past, and it's unfair to keep bringing her into our lives like this." The room fell silent. Helen's eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Emily looked shocked, but there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Mark stood up beside me, his voice steady but firm. "Sarah's right, Mom. This has to stop. If you can't respect our marriage, then we need to rethink how we interact with you." Helen was livid, but she couldn't argue with us in front of the entire family. She simply nodded and excused herself from the table. Emily tried to follow her, but Mark stopped her. "Emily, I think it's best if you leave. You're not welcome here anymore." It was a dramatic exit, but it was necessary. As we drove home that night, Mark and I talked about how we would handle things moving forward. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to put our relationship first. The days following Helen's birthday party were tense. Mark and I received a flurry of phone calls from family members, each with their own opinions on what had happened. Some were supportive, understanding our need to set boundaries. Others, particularly those close to Helen, were critical and accused us of overreacting. Helen herself was a different story. She refused to speak to Mark, her anger palpable even through the silence. Emily, on the other hand, made several attempts to reach out to Mark, claiming she wanted to clear the air. Mark politely but firmly declined her calls, making it clear that he needed space. The emotional toll on both of us was significant. Mark felt torn between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to our marriage. I struggled with feelings of guilt and doubt, wondering if I had pushed too hard. We decided to take a few days off work to regroup and spend time together, away from the chaos. Despite our efforts to distance ourselves from toxic family dynamics, Helen's influence loomed large. She made several attempts to reconnect with Mark, using guilt and manipulation to try and bring him back into the fold. She would call him late at night, leaving tearful voicemails about how much she missed him and how she couldn't understand why he was doing this to her. Mark was torn. He loved his mother, despite everything, and it was hard for him to see her in pain. But he also knew that allowing her back into our lives without any changes would only perpetuate the cycle of manipulation and hurt. One particularly challenging evening, Helen showed up at our doorstep unannounced. She was visibly upset, demanding to speak to Mark. I stepped aside, allowing them some privacy, but I could hear their heated exchange from the other room. "Mother, you need to understand that this isn't about punishing you," Mark said, his voice strained. "It's about protecting our marriage and setting boundaries." Helen's response was a mix of anger and desperation. "I'm your mother, Mark. How can you choose her over me?" "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else," Mark replied calmly. "I'm choosing a healthy relationship for myself and my wife. You need to respect that." After what felt like an eternity, Helen left, still fuming but with a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. A few months passed, and we thought we had reached a stable point in our relationship. But then, an incident occurred that forced us to confront the unresolved issues with Helen and Emily head-on. It was a sunny afternoon, and Mark and I were enjoying a picnic in the park. As we relaxed under a tree, we noticed a familiar figure approaching us, Emily. She looked distressed and anxious, a far cry from her usual composed self. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark and I exchanged glances before nodding. Emily sat down on the blanket, her eyes darting nervously between us. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I need to apologize," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been selfish and manipulative, and I see that now. I've been trying to hold on to something that doesn't exist anymore. I know I've hurt both of you, and I'm truly sorry." Her words caught us off guard. It was the first time Emily had shown any genuine remorse. Mark and I listened quietly as she poured out her heart, admitting to her mistakes and expressing her desire to make amends. It was a turning point, not just for Emily, but for us as well. We realized that holding on to resentment and anger was only hurting us. We needed to find a way to move forward, even if it meant forgiving those who had wronged us. Following our conversation with Emily, Mark and I decided to reach out to Helen. We wanted to address the lingering issues and see if there was a way to rebuild our relationship with her. It was a difficult decision, but we knew it was necessary for our own peace of mind. Helen was hesitant at first, but she agreed to meet with us. We chose a neutral location, a cozy cafe where we could talk without distractions. As we sat down, the tension was palpable. Helen looked wary, unsure of what to expect. Mark took the lead, explaining how he felt and why we had made the choices we did. He spoke calmly and respectfully, acknowledging Helen's feelings while also asserting our need for boundaries. Helen listened intently, her expression softening as Mark spoke. When he finished, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've been so focused on what I thought was best for you, Mark, that I didn't see how much I was hurting you," she admitted. "I love Emily like a daughter, but I understand now that she's not your future. Sarah is. And I need to respect that." It was a moment of genuine understanding and reconciliation. We talked for hours, addressing past hurts and setting clear boundaries for the future. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. Emily eventually moved on with her life. She found a new job in another city and decided to start fresh. We wished her well, grateful for the closure her departure brought. It was a bittersweet moment, but it marked the end of a tumultuous chapter in our lives.